Welcome to the Expansive CEO podcast. I'm your host, Hannah Chapman, founder of Expansive CEO and X Squared Wealth Planning. Buckle in as we explore how to create true prosperity and build a business and a life that expands beyond yourself and makes a dent in the universe. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Expansive CEO podcast. I am your host, Hannah Chapman, and I am here with another awesome human being today. His name is Aaron Morrison. He is the founder of Wyldfyre Dynamics and the creator of what he calls rapid recalibration, which is the process that he takes clients through on the road to like really living out their full potential. And so I'm super excited for this conversation. We have a lot in common in our ethos of like how we work with clients. Even though we're in very different fields. So Aaron, thank you so much for being here. And I would love for you to like introduce yourself more, who you are, why you do what you do, and how you help people.
Well, thank you, Hannah, for the warm welcome, that lovely introduction, and for the opportunity to be here with you and speak to your audience, hopefully provide a ton of value. I feel like that intro more than suffices. I'm more about what value can I deliver to the audience more so than about myself, but just in the way of explaining why they might want to listen to me in the first place,
There we go.
right? So, well, because that's always the question that people are asking: why should I listen to you?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you the authority on this, and why should I give credence to your ideas? So, I worked in construction for a number of years, and even though I kind of label myself a coach now, I was coaching even then. I just didn't call it that, right? I was doing leadership and conflict resolution and persuasion and influence. I was dealing with sales and negotiation, right? So all the skills that I was developing that I now use, I was working my way through it. Of course, then I was a quality control guy, but at one point I had 100 men in my division that I was responsible for. So I've done a lot of hiring and firing. I've done a lot of management and conflict resolution with clients and different personalities. And there was a point where I reached, I went out, started my own business, right? So this is now the second business that I've started that's been successful. And I reached a point in my company, my growth, where I call it scale or bail. And it was either time to hire people and grow the business or quit and go do something else and quote unquote start over. And both of those options were simultaneously terrifying and miserable. And on the journey of personal development, where I was trying to learn a new skill set, I was wanting to go into real estate investing. And I realized I didn't want to do that either. I was just going to be in the same boat in another couple of years and realizing I don't want to do this either. And so it was that kind of pivot where I was heading in this one direction. And then all of a sudden I passed this corner and there's this whole other world open over here. And I went, oh, holy smokes, I didn't even know that was available for me. So I 90-degree turn and went off in a completely different direction. And here I am. So my original purpose, my original realization, my epiphany was during one of my trainings, one of my certifications. I realized that what I had been doing was attempting to use my skill set and my knowledge base in a parallel kind of way, and something that was related to the field that I had been working in for almost 20 years at that point. And the realization was that the journey was not about climbing that particular mountain. The journey was really about determining which mountain it was I wanted to climb. And while I did enjoy what I did, and I did enjoy being the best at it, and I did enjoy the people that I worked with, it wasn't challenging, and it wasn't really making the sort of level of contribution that I wanted to make. And so I made a decision to burn the boats. I threw myself full time into coaching clients. I don't recommend that, incidentally. If you have a spouse or children that are dependent upon you for an income, I do not recommend that, but I didn't. So I figured, you know what? If I end up homeless, I'm the only one going to suffer. So now's the time to go ahead and take this chance. So I threw myself into it. And here I am. My stated mission purpose is, a disclaimer here, there's a F-bomb about to drop, but it'll be the only one. My stated mission and purpose in life is to raise the baseline of the human experience because needless suffering and wasted potential is a fucking tragedy. It
Mm.
literally is heartbreaking how many people underperform their potential out of fear or self doubt or just a lack of belief that either they can, that they're capable, or that that's even available for them, that they could even have it. And I see it day in and day out, and it breaks my heart. And so here I am doing my thing and working with clients to reprogram the unconscious mind so that they can just kind of naturally, easily, and effortlessly do what they need to do to get the results that they want to get.
I think that is so beautiful. It's such it really like to me feels like you're taking this again, this whole area of human potential and just trying to open it up, say like, "Hey, like what are you capable of?" And we are all capable of so much, right? Like human potential is vast. It's so fascinating to see any of the research, right? That just keeps coming out about how incredible our minds are, our bodies, our hearts, our spirits, our souls, everything, right? Like we are amazing, amazing beings. And I love what you said before we started recording. So share that little example first. I'll let you share it because I thought it was super cute.
Oh, the analogy.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah. So I'm sitting in this training, and this is the one where it just blew the top of my head off. And I had this like a shot between the eyes. I was like, oh my goodness. And I realized that all I had been capable of perceiving up until that point was just this very small kind of band of potential, just the few steps that are right in front of me. And when I woke up to the realization that it wasn't about which mountain or climbing this mountain that I was on, it was about deciding which one I wanted to climb because the skill sets were also useful in other contexts and other applications. I had this image in my mind of human potential being this Ferrari. Like we're all these Ferraris driving around with all of this just raw power under the hood, just like raw. And yet, if you look at the thought bubble over our heads of our identities and the way that we see ourselves, our self-image, they're all a bunch of minivans and Pintos. It's
Mhm.
like we don't even see ourselves realistically in terms of the true potential that we actually have, right? So I do believe that there is absolutely 100% untapped potential in every single human on this planet. And that's not to say that everybody has the same capabilities. That just means that everybody is capable of more than they're currently doing. And there's one of my sayings is that we never ever will reach our full potential because as our capabilities expand, the possibilities expand. So we're never ever going to reach our actual full potential. And to me, that's a very exciting thing because that means we can make quantum leap after quantum leap after quantum leap and still never actually fully, completely actualize what we're capable of. Like there's literally unlimited potential for growth, which is just astounding to me. That's just so exciting. Like there's,
Mm.
where are we going? I don't know. Where do you want to go? The entire universe is literally wide open. So yeah, yeah,
I love that. I love that really like I'm also my husband and I have been watching Drive to Survive on Netflix uh recently, which is all about F1 racing. And so that also like really um like just I seeing that like yeah, like what if you believed that you were an F1 race car instead of, a beat up 1989 Toyota Camry, right? Like you that is what you are on a soul level.
yeah,
And I love what you shared about like we all have different levels of capability. Um, but we're always, capable of more. And it's just all down to what you can allow yourself to imagine and allow yourself to stretch for and try for. One it's very um Yeah, I'm going to share this. It may be a little bit vulnerable for me, so I'm going to go ahead and say it. But my kids, two of my kids, I've shared this on the podcast before, but my two older kids are on the autism spectrum. I have three kids total. My youngest is not on the spectrum, um, but they are so amazingly intelligent and they're so capable of so many things. And as a mother, when they were little, I could see that. I knew how smart they were and how warm and friendly and amazing they were. And they also had social and emotional needs that were different from other kids that we just had to work on and adapt to. And what I found through their journey, my oldest now is now 13, my middle is 11. So they're 13, 11 right now, going into 8th grade, 6th grade. Being in an environment, being in the regular public school environment, even with all the supports and their IEPs and me and my husband being very strong advocates for them, it was not a good environment. They were having so much trouble fitting into the, like, you have to fit into this mold with these other kids. You're supposed to, so we're going to keep you in that classroom as much as possible, right? It was a disaster most of the time. And when we were able to get them into an environment, into a school specifically for kids on the spectrum, um, that tailors like all of their work to the grade level they're at in all different subjects, they have thrived. They have absolutely thrived. And the reason that it feels like so similar to me is that it's like, depending on where we're at, depending on what we're surrounded by, what other people are telling us, right? If you're in school and your teachers are telling you you're a bad kid, why are you doing these bad things? Why are you being such a bad kid? Or, she's just not understanding math and she just gets so upset and she just won't even try, right? And if that's the message that they're being reinforced, all right, okay, well, let's try a different environment. And it turns out, no, none of those things are true. They just needed to be able to have different kind of input and
Mhm.
see different possibilities that are available to them. And so just knowing, like, I saw their potential. I know how amazing they are. And to then be in an environment where other people were encouraging that potential and nurturing that potential and then seeing it take off, like exactly the same. Like, who even knows how capable they are?
You've said so many things just in that bit right there, where you hit the nail on the head when you said belief. Because if we believe it's possible or not, then it is, or it isn't,
Mhm.
right? And so what I find is what is possible is completely dependent upon what you believe is possible. You have to believe it first. And so the quality of our beliefs that we have, right? Um, Tony Robbins has a saying that I think is super powerful, which is the most powerful force in the universe is our desire to be consistent with who we believe ourselves to be. And so you mentioned before we started recording, like, who are you being? Like, what is your being? Like, how are you showing up in the world? Right. And that's who we decide,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of, like, this is the fixed versus growth mindset conversation, right? Where I'm 100% on the growth side of the equation. A lot of people, they get into the grind, they get into their habit and their routine, and then they just kind of stagnate and they just maintain status quo. And there's not really a whole lot going on. But there is no part of a person's personality which is fixed or immovable, right? Everything is malleable, everything is changeable. I mean, I once took a client and completely shifted her relationship to time in like a minute. you know and that's a funny story that we can get to later, but what you just said, right, I think puts to bed once and for all the whole nature nurture controversy. It's all about the environment. It's all about what do we surround ourselves with. And so that's a very powerful awareness of what are we tolerating in our environment. What are we allowing to be around us that's influencing our emotional state and our effectiveness and our ability to actually actualize our potential. And to the point where you said that it wasn't until you took your kids out of that unsupportive environment and put them somewhere that people were more empathetic and understanding and encouraging and nurturing, that they started to really flourish. And so relating that to the coaching industry, there are a lot of coaches that love to say, oh, they're uncoachable, right?
Mm.
My personal opinion is that if a coach is calling a client uncoachable, that's just an excuse for their inability to get the results. It's just an excuse. It's nonsense. Because one of my beliefs that I have is that there are no resistant clients. There are only inflexible communicators. And so, as the coach, as your children's teacher, right? Their obligation is to figure out, okay, well, this box that I want to put you in doesn't really work, right? And rather than trying to force the square peg into the round hole, they need to figure out what is the right combination of words, or what is the approach that I need to take that's actually going to get the result, right? Like it's not your kid's responsibility to show up and cater to the teacher and mold themselves to the teacher's will. It's the teacher's job to figure out how to reach that child so that they get the education that they need.
Mhm.
So I think schools by and large are failing our children, but we don't need to get into it.
There's quite a discussion to be had there for sure. But I think that that discussion actually leads really, really well into like your experiences as a child and as an adolescent and as a young adult, especially, for most of us, most of those years are spent in school, right? Where we're really forming a lot of our beliefs about ourselves, and then they translate into the working world, and then they translate into, if we are entrepreneurs, right? Like, what do we think we're going to be capable of as entrepreneurs based on what we achieved or didn't achieve as children, right? Like, so these belief systems, they start way back from the very beginning,
Oh yeah.
and then they just keep growing and taking root, or like shifting and growing in different ways. And so when you get to someone, right, or someone gets to you as an adult who is feeling maybe burned out, or like full of anxiety around what they're supposed to be doing, or like they're not living in their purpose, right? All of these different things they might be feeling. What's the first thing that you take them through? Like, what are the ways that you see that client to help them then find their purpose or their passion or their inner resilience? I think the resilience piece is a really important
Mm.
piece of the
It,
conversation.
I think it's less about finding and more about remembering,
Mm,
because it, to take it all the way up to the highest, most abstract level, the job of any coach or mentor, advisor, whatever, their purpose is to hold in their mind a vision of the highest version of the client and coach them from that place, having the knowledge and the certainty that whatever they need is already inside them. It's our job to pull it out and to make them aware of the resources that they already have, because there are no unresourceful people. There's nobody on the planet that doesn't already have everything that they need inside them,
mm,
right? They just don't realize that they have it. And so what we need to do is move them from their unresourceful state into a resourceful state, right? Where they realize that they are already perfectly and adequately resourced in and of themselves, that they don't need anything from the outside, except maybe in some cases permission,
mm,
permission to shine, right? Because if they were a child and, multiple kids in the family with a bunch of siblings, and you can't outshine the other one because, making them feel bad and all of that, all the stuff that happens. And yeah, you're right that our beliefs, by and large, are formed by the time we're 7. That 0 to 7 age range is what's called the imprint period. And
mhm,
even the ancient Greeks, I believe it was Aristotle who said, "Give me the child until he's 7, and I'll show you the man." They understood the importance of those first formative years and the formation of those beliefs. Because what's happening is, on a scientific level, right, the neocortex isn't really online until age 7 or 8. And so when we are operating out of the lizard brain and the limbic brain, the mammalian emotional brain, right, kids are living in a state of trance, basically. Their brain is in theta waves, theta state, which is in a trance. It's hypnosis, right? When I do hypnosis with clients, that's where they go, is to theta state.
mhm,
And just for those folks who've never done hypnosis in the past, theta state is basically that kind of twilight zone in between sleep and wakefulness. So falling asleep and waking up, that kind of in between period, that's the theta state, right? And that's where kids live. And when they're in that state, they're very susceptible to suggestion. They don't have the critical faculty, they don't have the filters to determine if the information is good or bad, beneficial or harmful. They just don't have that capability. And so they literally are operating out of a need for survival.
Mhm.
They learn how to operate in their environment, and they make decisions based on their experiences. And those are essentially what our beliefs is, the decision that we made about the meaning of an event. So parent acts some kind of way and, criticizes the child, acts up out of frustration or whatever, that has absolutely nothing to do with the kid, but the kid learns my feelings don't matter. And so they go through life hiding, not being visible, people pleasing type behaviors and things like this. So, yeah, like literally everything that we deal with comes from our childhood. And so, to answer the question, the first thing that I do with clients is ask them a bunch of questions to understand what's going on here, right? Like, I need to understand, how are you doing the problem, right? What is the process in here? What is the order of the feelings and the thoughts, or the thoughts and the feelings and the actions that are creating this outcome? And then diving even deeper, what are the beliefs underlying all of that that are informing and creating those thoughts? Because we can't think a thought which is inconsistent in what we believe to be true.
Mhm.
So you tell me what you're thinking, I'll tell you what you believe. And then we go in and we change the programming, right? So, because that's really what's necessary. And we do it at the unconscious level, because the unconscious mind, literally a million times more powerful than the conscious mind. Trying to change the unconscious with the conscious is like trying to tow a cruise ship with a rowboat. Not going to happen. You're not going to make a whole lot of progress. Is it possible? Yes, with a lot of time and a lot of repetition, right? So what we want to do is we want to short circuit that, get right to the core, figure out what the heck is going on at the unconscious level, and then go in and change the program with whatever technique is most appropriate for that particular context in that situation. And so it's going to change, But to your point, that humans, we basically operate the same. The fact that we can do what we do means that humans will behave in patterns. And so being successful in a lot of cases is dependent upon our ability to recognize those patterns, and then leverage those in a way which is effective and useful. And so if it weren't for our likeness, our sameness, it would be very difficult to get anything done.
Mm, yeah. Oh,
So,
that's such a good point, actually. No one had, I haven't heard anyone articulate that quite that way, that our pattern recognition skills depend on the fact that we are actually, we behave similarly based on a set of stimuli, or that people will tend to have, right?
mhm,
Or if we know one person very well, right? That's where those pattern recognition skills can really get honed as children, for sure. Um, is this person, when this thing happens, they react that way.
mhm,
So, and I'm going to know that, and I'm going to stay safe, because I
yeah,
know if this trigger happens, that this bad thing will happen.
yeah,
Which reading, many people have talked about this, but Brene Brown is coming to mind.
mhm,
Talking in her forward for oh, what was that one? Her more recent one, Atlas of the Heart. There we go. She was telling the story of her. She was the oldest child, and um, she could predict the future. And what she meant by that was that she knew all of the triggers for her parents and for her younger siblings. And she could always tell, like, this thing just happened, so this next thing is about to happen, and I need to get my siblings to safety.
mhm,
And that level of pattern recognition, um, depends on, right? It does depend on us being similar and consistent in ways, right? And so when she grew up and noticed that, oh, other people react similarly, right? The same pattern recognition, it works over and
mhm,
over and over again. Um, it's really a powerful realization. And the belief here's what I see in this, like that quote unquote superpower, we could call it that, that amazing pattern recognition, that amazing ability to keep people safe. It can still be a superpower if we can decouple it almost from
Mhm.
the trauma, right? Or like heal the trauma that came underneath
Mhm.
that caused it, and then still be able to honor the fact that, hey, you like are amazing at this,
Mhm.
and that's okay. And it's helping people.
There's something that you just that just popped into my head. Actually, about 10 things that popped into my head. But something that I think is relevant to mention here is that when we're talking about pattern recognition, and whoever's listening to this podcast, at whatever level of success you consider yourself to be, it whatever the challenges are that your audience is facing, whatever they perceive their problems to be, everybody across the world, and I've worked with clients internationally, all different income levels and ethnic backgrounds. Doesn't matter where you're from, how you were raised, how much money you make, everybody's got the same problems. It's all the same,
Mhm.
right? We all have the same insecurities. We all have the same fears and doubts. We all have the same hangups, right? I had a client that made $2.5 million a year and he's beating himself up because he wasn't making five, right? Most people, I think, listening to this would be more than content, would be over the moon with 2.5 million a year. But this guy was beating himself up, right? So it's all relative. And the problem is, as children, right? Like you mentioned Brene Brown, she grew up and she recognized, oh, I see this pattern happening elsewhere. Part of the issue is that children kind of globalize their decision making and apply it across the board. They're not able to distinguish and differentiate between this and that. They're not really good with the discriminating between what's good and bad, and this person's like this and that person's like that, right? They kind of had a tendency to think that everything's the same.
Mhm.
And when it comes to, you mentioned trauma, so I have a slightly different definition of trauma, right? So uh, typically we're aware that we have quote unquote trauma because we have an emotional trigger, right? So I define a trigger as the event being down here and the appropriate response being down here, but our emotions are up here, right?
Mhm.
And generally speaking, we're aware of the gap in between, right? Typically, we're asking ourselves, why am I reacting this way? Why is that so triggering to me? Right. And the trigger is the reminder to go back and clean up that thing from the past. Right.
Mhm.
Because what I've learned is that you either have the learnings from the event, what it was meant to teach you, or you have the trigger, never both, because the trigger means you haven't got the learnings yet. You didn't learn what you needed to from it. And then once you did learn what you needed to, you don't need the trigger because there's
Right.
no reason to go back and rehash it again. Right. So trauma, as I define it, is not what happened to you. It is what you internalized from the event and what you made it mean about you. And I
Mhm.
have seen people, I've seen kids in a family that were subjected to the exact same treatment, and one kid is traumatized by it and the other kid's like, yeah, that was messed up but didn't have anything to do with me. They're the screwed up one, and totally fine. So this experiences don't impact everybody the same, and this is not to minimize what somebody experienced, right? Because believe you me, I've been through some stuff.
Mhm.
Right? And I know, and I talk to a lot of people who have been through stuff, and it breaks my heart every single time. And my choice in the way that I approach it is to look at it from a more logical standpoint. Because, like, let's just play suppose for a moment, right? So I was reading this book. It's called The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot. You want to blow your mind, pick that one up. It literally blew my mind. It's all about quantum and the energetic fabric of the universe and all of this stuff. So there's one part of the book that's talking about a guy, a hypnotherapist, and he's doing past life regression work with people. Whether you believe in past lives or not, I don't. I'm as far as I'm concerned, the jury's out on the topic. Right? It doesn't matter whether there are or aren't past lives. Some of my clients remember past lives and some of them don't. And it's not my place to tell them that it exists or it doesn't. So in my universe, it's all possible. So this hypnotherapist, he's doing past life regression work, and something very interesting kept happening over and over again. And these people would go back to this planning stage in between their lifetimes. And they would remember this planning stage, and they would remember putting all these different events along their timeline, and they would know what was coming. They would now remember, oh, I put this thing in my timeline, but it hasn't happened yet. They knew it was coming. And every single one of them, every single person, you know what they did? Is they asked the hypnotherapist to install a suggestion that they forget that they remembered.
Oh, wow.
Because if they got to that event knowing that it was coming, it wouldn't have the impact that they designed for themselves.
Wow.
And so I've had clients working with them, doing the techniques that they, in the moment, they have this spontaneous epiphany where they go, oh man, I put this on my timeline. I brought this here for myself to learn through. I did this. So if we choose to look at it from that perspective, then everything that we've experienced in our lives was an event that we created for ourselves and designed that for us to learn something from, right? So something that I've realized, something that I know to be true, is that our greatest strengths came from our greatest struggles.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can choose to look at that event as something that was a gift in disguise, maybe, but if we can choose to look at that event as a gift and ask ourselves the question, how did that happen for me? And what am I supposed to learn from this? What can I take away from this that's actually valuable and useful and resourceful for me? Then we can completely shift our attitude about our past experiences. And rather than that person did that thing to me, it's instead, well, maybe I intended for myself to go through that so that I could learn a lesson, so that I could grow stronger, so that I could become who I am today, so that I was ready for the rest of the challenges life was going to throw at me. Because if I went through that, well, then everything else is minor, it's tiny by comparison, right? So that's just the way that I choose to look at it. And your audience could try it on if they want, and feel free to reject it if it doesn't apply. No minimization or dismissal of anybody's experience or any of that. It's just could be useful for some folks to try it on, see how it fits, see how it feels, and maybe help to reframe the conversation around past traumas and the stuff that we carry around with us today.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that I kind of think about it is, you ever seen a horse walking down the street, clop, 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 and just, droppings behind the horse?
Yep. Yep.
So the way that I see these negative past experiences is like if you picked up a big chunk of those horse droppings and just put them in a backpack, and just keep putting that shit in the backpack, right?
Yep.
And what that is that ball of manure represents that negative experience. Now, the thing about it is that hidden inside each ball of manure is a golden nugget. It's the learning that you were intended to get from that experience. And so if rather than running around with this heavy backpack of all the baggage we've been hauling, crying about how bad it stinks, oh man, the smell, it's awful. Ugh,
Right.
jeez. Right? Instead, if we made the decision to go ahead and just let's put on our rubber gloves or our latex gloves, right? Let's dig in and let's break this thing apart so that we can get that golden nugget of the learnings outside of it. Because the only reason it's still in the backpack is because of the gold nugget that's hidden inside. Once we get that out, once we get those learnings from that event, we don't need to carry around the manure anymore. We can get rid of that. We can let that go, right? Because by seeing the gold nugget, by choosing to see the gift in the experience, it changes the meaning of the experience, right? Viktor Frankl,
Yeah.
A Man's Search for Meaning. This guy, and this is one that I keep going back to, is he was a survivor of Auschwitz. And he has a quote that I love, which is, in the space between the stimulus and the response is your power to decide. And that's where your true power lies, is in that space between whatever happened and whatever you decided to do about it is your power to choose. And so to me, if a guy who survived Auschwitz can come out of that experience, if he can give meaning to his suffering to that degree, then what the heck do I have to complain about?
Mm.
I'm like, that right there is, for me, is the pinnacle of choosing to find the meaning in suffering and choosing to have a positive attitude about and find the gift, even though it was miserable, objectively terrible, and just a horrific thing. But he chose to find the meaning in the suffering. And that, what I find, is a huge difference between people who struggle with their past experiences and people who have made peace with them and moved on.
Mm-hmm. And I want to share that I truly believe that as well, that things are happening for us, or the experiences we have are for us, not to us. And I also want to be, I think you articulated this really well, but I want to be super sensitive to the fact that if you hear that and that is not where you're at right now with different, I mean, people carry different traumas that are awful, right? And that's not to excuse or dismiss, the harm that some people cause others, right? And it's not to say that it was your fault, right? I think that's
Oh, not at all.
we
Yeah,
can
this
hear that sometimes, right? And they're like, "You're saying that was my fault that I was abused as a child?" No, absolutely not.
right.
Absolutely not. And yet, this way of uh alchemizing or transmuting that experience, like what you're saying now is you are still getting to choose if you're still being, if that trigger is still causing just such a deeply hard emotional reaction for you, then this is the time that you can choose, right? You can choose to see it a different way. You can choose to live life differently without ever having to minimize, right, the pain that you went through. That's definitely not what that invitation is about from my perspective, from, like, thinking about the pushback, the ways that people, like, hear that and they go, what about people, who hurt children in all kinds of different ways, or children who've gone through different things, or, like, no, that was not your fault. And
Yeah, definitely not a finger pointing or a blame finding or a fault finding, right? Like it's a useful frame to look at the experience differently.
Mhm.
But yeah, I've very strong views about people who hurt children, and I'll just say they're very strong.
Yeah.
um,
And I again truly appreciate the frame that you put on that, of like, try it on. If that feels like it's going to help you, move through it. Keep going, right? Like,
mhm,
keep exploring that. If you try that on and it feels like, nope, not right now, that's okay. That's okay. You might need something else first before you can try that one on. Or that might not be the path, right? Like, all opportunities, all different ways of healing are available. And if you're in a place where you're like, I want to heal, that doesn't feel quite right. All right, keep exploring.
yeah,
Keep finding ways. The possibilities are endless.
that's
Uh,
right.
so I want to be respectful of our time here,
Sure.
and I want you to have an opportunity to share, how can people get a hold of you? Where do you hang out online, or in person? And yeah, what's coming up next?
Well, I hang out in person all over the place. I'm based out of Atlanta, Georgia, but I find myself in various parts of the country, down in Florida, Arizona, North Carolina. So I might be anywhere. You never know, especially at live transformational events. Like, you definitely are going to find me at live transformational events. Um, in terms of how to get a hold of me, I think that probably the best thing to do, can I share a link?
Yeah, absolutely.
For anybody who struggles with anxiety or its effects, because a lot of things that are caused by anxiety, people don't attribute to anxiety, like the burnout and the overwhelm that I hear a lot of people talking about. Well, a lot of the reason for the burnout and the overwhelm is anxiety, right? So, not doing a deep dive into all of that, but I have a really super cool tool that I've created. I've made a recording of this guided visualization. It's 2.5 minutes long. I call it the 2 minute anxiety hack. And it's a technique that I do with live audiences. I love it because there's always a skeptic when I say, who wants to get rid of anxiety in 2 minutes? And somebody's like, no, you can't do that. That doesn't exist. And I'm like, all right, cool. Who wants to do it? Everybody raises their hand. So I walk them through it. And at the end of it, I say, whose anxiety either completely disappeared or significantly reduced? And almost the entire room will raise their hand, including the skeptic. Didn't believe it was possible. So if they want to grab a hold of that, they can go to easyanxietyhack.com, spelled just like it sounds, EASY, anxietyhack.com, all one word. And they'll get the access to the private YouTube playlist where there's an explainer video talking about reframing the conversation around anxiety. And then there's the technique itself. And they can just bookmark it and go back to it and use it over and over and over and over again. And it's just really, really a cool thing. And then, I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook if they want to consume more of my content, because I do post pretty consistently on there.
Awesome. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for being here with us today, talking about all these super important topics. And I appreciate the connection and appreciate getting to know you. So thank you so much. And for anyone who, you know, has questions, who this sparked anything for you, would love to hear what resonated or what didn't from this episode. You can find me anywhere really online. Send me a DM, send me an email. And if you want to connect with Aaron, all of his links will be in the show notes as well. Super easy to find. So, Aaron, thank you again for being here
Thank
with
you
us. Really appreciate it.
very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It was lovely having this conversation with you.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and be sure to like and subscribe. And again, if anything resonated with you from this episode, I would love to hear from you. Email me at Hannah, HANNAH, at expansiveceo.com and tell me about it. And if you're ready for your greatest expansion, you can find ways to work with me at expansiveceo.com and at x2wealthplanning.com. That's X, the numeral 2, wealthplanning.com. So until next time, remember that there is enough. You are enough. And your birthright in this lifetime is to be expansive.